Women in Poverty and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women.
My name is Siobhán Harding and I am Research and Policy Officer with Women's Support Network.
Tell us how CEDAW addresses financial hardship and poverty.
CEDAW doesn't have a standalone right to be free from poverty, but the core premise of CEDAW is that gender inequality is a key driver of economic disadvantage. So really it's linking CEDAW with financial hardship and poverty is not just about looking at a lack of income, it's about those structural inequalities that exist in women's lives that make them more likely to live in poverty. And that's things like greater likelihood of providing care, whether that's for children or for people who are sick or have additional needs, and greater likelihood of being a victim of gender-based violence and things like that. So it's all about the structural inequalities in women's lives that lead them to be more vulnerable to poverty.
Do you feel that women in Northern Ireland have equal opportunities to be financially secure and take part fully in community and social life?
The short answer is no. Women are more likely to be in part-time, low-paid and insecure work. They're more likely to be providing care, as I said, for either children or unpaid care for sick and people with additional needs. And they're more likely to have to make up for cuts to services. And we know there have been a lot of cutbacks to public services. And it's women that are more likely to have to make up for those cuts through unpaid work. And all of those things then limit women's lives and their ability to increase their finances. So it really does limit their financial capabilities, not just at the time, but into the future, because it has implications for pensions into the longer term as well. So, women, we talk about women in the women's sector being the shock absorbers of poverty in the home. And that's very much the role that they take on. So they'll go without food, they'll go without heat and clothing to provide for their children and other family members when money is tight. But that constant stress over money and trying to make ends meet and being hungry or cold, that has an impact on your ability to take part in community life. And to go further, even getting involved in politics and things like that. So it's all about all of those structural inequalities really mean that women are more likely to be isolated and to be living in poverty, and that makes it more difficult then to be able to take an active part in community life. So it is very limiting.
If there were one or two key asks that could really improve women's economic well-being, what would you prioritise?
We want to see a fully funded early learning and childcare strategy, which and we saw a draft strategy, but it didn't address well enough the needs of low-income women and women who are the most marginalised. So we want to see a strategy that's fully funded and that recognises that there is a need for childcare for those on the lowest incomes. And we recommended the Women-Centred Childcare Fund model, provision for women. So that acknowledges that women on low incomes need access to training and education linked to free childcare provision to allow them to take advantage of training and education that they need to get themselves into a position where they're able to consider work and to get themselves into a position where they're ready for work and supported into a job. So in summary, two key asks. One, a fully funded anti-poverty strategy for Northern Ireland, recognising women's greater likelihood of living in poverty. And secondly, a fully funded early learning and childcare strategy, which addresses the need for childcare for women on the lowest incomes also.